Thanks, Rohit. It's always quite an experience to hear yourself be introduced. My sort of head keeps dropping as the introduction goes on. We've had a wonderful day of sessions, and we're going to end it with a sort of an hour to an hour, 15-minute long conversation with Nandan Nilekani. So let me introduce him really briefly. In some sense, to this audience, Nandan needs no introduction, but we have an audience of people watching from around the world on our webcast, so let me introduce Nandan really briefly. He's currently the chairman of the UID Authority of India, the Unique Identification Authority of India, which is a cabinet-level position. Prior to that, for I think 2 or 3 decades, he worked for Infosys. He was one of the co-founders of Infosys. He served as their CEO for 5 years. He's also a best-selling author. His book, Imagining India, which sort of paints this picture for progress for India's future, I think is a book that a number of us have read. I know that many of you have mentioned it to me during the course of the day. So, Nandan, if you could just sort of join me on stage. The way that I thought we'd organize this session is we're just going to have a chat about infrastructure, about the sort of through the lens of the UID project that Nandan has been leading for the last 4 years. And we want to sort of keep this exchange sort of relatively brief. Whether we'll achieve that goal or not remains to be seen, but that's the goal, so that we can hear a lot from you guys. And if you're watching and you're not in the room and you want to send in a question, you can just tweet the question, put the hashtag #SternIndia, and we'll try and get your question included in the discussion. Okay, so Nandan, just to sort of situate the context of this, we've talked about cities today. We started off talking about sort of cities and the future of urban growth. We talked about valuation. We talked about governance. And I thought it would be sort of a good end to the day to talk about infrastructure. And because in some sense, it seems to me that a big part of what will determine India's progress over the next few decades is going to be building the country's, not just the economic infrastructure like roads and water and waste management and all that, but the social infrastructure as well, education, healthcare. And we've seemed to have done sort of privately a good job with telecom. This seems to have been some progress with sort of air transportation. And whenever I think about infrastructure, in some sense, sort of a shining example of how infrastructure can potentially be done right for India is the UID effort. And so what I'm hoping we can do is talk about that project, but also sort of in the broader context of other kinds of infrastructure and how what you've done for the UID might translate to them. So I thought we'd start off by just you telling us briefly, there are lots of different challenges that India faces, right? And you chose identity as sort of the thing that you would solve. And so can you just give us some context for why you felt it was so important?
Sure. No, I think I came to this project because I saw it as something which has a high multiplier effect. If this is solved, then it solves a lot of things. And basically, the reason why this particular project has become important is really 2 or 3 different reasons. The first is that there is still a very large number of people in India who don't have any acknowledgement of their existence by the state. They don't have a piece of paper which is like a birth certificate or a driver's license or a school certificate. Things that we take for granted are identity documents.
Yeah.
And that may not have mattered earlier when people lived in their village and didn't move around because everybody knew the name, like in Cheers.
Yeah.
But in this new world where people are migrating and millions of people are going from villages to cities, from north to south and all that, not having any acknowledgement of existence actually impedes your progress. If you don't have an ID, you can't get a bank account, you can't get a mobile connection, you can't get your PDS and rice entitlements, you can't get a job. So a whole host of barriers it creates. So the need was there to really give hundreds of millions of people an ID. And part of the reason is that when they were born, they did register their birth, so they don't have birth. Even today,
Yeah.
in some parts of India, more than half the kids don't have birth certificates. So it's a fairly major problem. So one was to fix the identity problem and give them an acknowledgement of existence by the state.
Yeah.
The other thing is that in the last 20 years, India has built, is building what you can think of as a welfare state. If you look at the big expenditures in India on health, on education, on employment guarantees, pensions, it's all in the last 10 years. So as the economy grew and tax revenues grew, also the social welfare programs grew. And as these programs grew, it started becoming clear that a lot of those benefits were not really reaching the right people because
Lot of leakage,
they didn't have any identity, and therefore there was feeling that there's fraud and wastage in these amounts. So both these things came together. The need for social inclusion of millions of Indians without ID and the need for making the government expenditure more effective, more efficient, and more equitable. And the only way you could really solve that problem was by having an ID system. And this is what happened, by the way, in the West. In the US, the Social Security Act was passed by Roosevelt in 1935, 1936 for the purpose of creating social security. And they realized very quickly that if they were going to have social security for a person to the entire life, they need a way to identify the person, which is how the social security numbers started coming in the US. And the same thing happened in UK in the 50s and Europe in the welfare state in Europe in the 20th century. So since we're building an ID system in the 21st century, we said we'll do it as a digital ID system. So I think the big thing is that the ID system was required anyway for other purposes. But we said, let's build it as a digital platform. I think that's the sort of leap that we did.
Okay, and it's interesting because, I mean, in some sense, what you're describing is, and you've used this term before in like conversation, I know that sort of identity is a gateway, right? That the country might have solid economic institutions. There are certain property rights, courts of law, banking, all of these infrastructures that sort of exist. It's just that a large fraction of the country doesn't have a channel to reach them.
Yes.
And so, in some sense, this is a complementary infrastructure to all of the other existing infrastructures that
Absolutely.
are out there.
It's a gateway to services. For example, to open a bank account, around the world, there's a process called Know Your Customer. And Know Your Customer became especially more relevant after 9/11 because it's been tightened up and there's a lot of requirements because of terrorism and all that. So now if you don't have any ID, there's no way to verify your identity. And therefore you can't open a bank account. Now what's been happening in India now is that the Reserve Bank of India, which is the regulator for India, has declared the Aadhaar number or the UID number as sufficient Know Your Customer to open a bank account. So therefore if you get an Aadhaar number, then you automatically become eligible to open a bank account. And also an insurance policy, and also a railway ticket, and also an LPG connection, and also a pension, and also a mutual fund. So what happens is that it becomes a gateway to many services. So possessing this ID number then becomes a gateway to many services.
I know.
And when a new entity, institution offers a new service, it becomes instantly accessible to all the people with the number. And that's where the network effect comes, right? So let's say there are 300 million people with a number, and the insurance regulator says now Aadhaar is sufficient to buy an insurance policy. Then instantly all 300 million people become eligible. So that kind of effect where you get mass inclusion is very important.
Okay. I mean, it's, I guess, it's, you brought up the social security system, and actually, before we get to that, I guess one of the things I found really surprising, as you know, we've, my colleague Ravi Bapna and I have been sort of surveying the country to try and understand, what the impact of the UID is going to be over time. But it wasn't clear to us until a few months ago just the extent to which this problem of lack of identity is prevalent in the country. Because if you think about these IDs that are portable, where you can take it from one city to the other, and like a passport or a driver's license or a PAN card, it seemed like there were more than 70% of households where there was not even a single person who had a portable form of ID. And so, like, the number of people in the country who don't have this kind of ID is evidently a lot larger than that. But coming back to a point that you just made about FDR instituting Social Security in the 30s, and the Social Security number is now the sort of it's the identifier for most people in the US. But as you mentioned, this is the 21st century, and in some sense, we haven't had an identity system like the Social Security numbers, but now we've got the UID. So, I mean, tell us a bit about the platform idea, this
Sure.
sort of identity platform idea, because it's really fascinating in terms of what the potential could be, but I don't think that it's completely understood by a lot of people.
Yeah, so I think the problem was to give people an ID. And the challenge was to give them an ID, especially people who did not have an ID. So we have a concept called the introducer, where if somebody has no documentation whatsoever, then somebody can say, I know this guy, his name is X, and then we can enroll him into our system. Now, to make sure that the system was sort of, could be much more rigorous, we make sure these IDs are unique, which means a person can't get more than one ID in our system.
Okay.
And now, obviously, across 1 billion people, how do you make sure that a person does not get more than one ID?
Yeah.
And that's where the biometrics comes in. So we use a biometric signature of a person to identify the uniqueness. And when somebody enrolls into our system, we compare his or her biometrics with the entire gallery of biometrics that we have to establish whether it's a duplicate or not.
Okay.
This is a fairly massive computational exercise. So it's the world's largest database of this kind.
Already?
Already. Okay. It's probably twice or 3 times as large as what else is there. But what is important to realize is this is the first use of biometrics for developmental purposes. Okay. And that's an important thing which people have to get their minds around. Historically, biometrics has been used for forensics, crime detection and perimedicine, the fingerprint on the glass kind of stuff. And then after 9/11, biometrics was used essentially for surveillance, security, and all that. Like a foreigner walks into the US, he gives his biometrics, and then they check whether the guy has come before and all that. So those have been the way. This is the first use of biometrics for public service delivery, development, and inclusion. Okay. And that's the big change that we have brought to that whole technology. So anyway, so using the biometrics, we make sure the number is unique.
Okay.
And not only the number unique, it's an online ID. So it's not just a paper-based ID, it's an online ID, which can be verified anywhere on the cloud. So what that does is your ID becomes portable across the country. Okay. So I can get my ID number in Bihar, I come to Delhi, my ID travels with me because the verification of the ID is on the cloud, which works everywhere on the network. And therefore, we essentially are leapfrogging people from no IDs to digital IDs.
Okay, so the step of sort of like a printed ID is sort of just completely skipped.
Yeah, I mean, they get a printed ID to keep their IDs, but fundamentally the real payoff comes from the online IDs. And that online ID is built as an open platform.
Okay, so can you tell us what that means?
Yeah, what it means is that we have providing online ID verification. So let's say that you go to a bank outlet and you want to withdraw money from your bank account. Yeah. The bank has to confirm that you are Arun, right? Yeah. Historically, how did you do that? You did a signature, or you gave a check which you possessed, or you used a debit card, or you gave a password that you used. Here we can use biometrics to identify you. So you can actually put your finger on a machine and we'll confirm that that is really Arun. And you can do that anywhere in the country. Okay. So this online verification of identity is a feature we have. And the online verification of identity is a platform which is an open programming interface. Okay. So any application can embed ID verification using our platform in their applications.
Okay, so that's a really important point.
So this becomes, what was essentially historically ID programs in the world have been for a purpose. Yep. ID is done for the purpose of voting or for the purpose of tax or the purpose of security or whatever. This is an ID program that just does ID on which you can layer an app. And you can actually layer multiple apps. So you can think of it as an app store using identity. And that's where the platform concept comes in.
Okay, I mean, and that's sort of a really important point, right? Because this is not just something that, I mean, while there may have been early motivation for it to make government services more efficient, It's not restricted in its value to purely like, the delivery of government services. This can be a private bank.
Yeah,
it can be
we
a
have
healthcare
built a
provider.
platform where we have an application ecosystem, and
Yeah.
the application ecosystem can be government agencies, public companies, private companies, startups. Anybody can be a user of this service, and anybody can build an app where identity verification required and plug in this stuff.
Okay, so it's sort of like the thinking that comes from the tech sector, right?
Yeah, I think
as-
the big thing is, I guess in some sense that because the background of not just me, but a lot of my team, both in the government folks and the private guys,
Yeah.
was from the technology world. We brought in a lot of ideas from that world, the ideas of network effects, platforms, app stores, open interfaces and all that. And one thing that struck us was that if you look at when does something proliferate in technology world, it proliferates when, or even in the physical world, when you have a simple codification of that thing so that anybody can use it without worrying about where it is. For example, if you look
Yeah.
at the internet, the TCP/IP was the protocol. Before the TCP/IP protocol came, everybody had his own little network of computers, but you couldn't connect them all together.
Yep.
What TCP/IP did was it made you able to connect them because you just needed to know the IP address.
Yeah.
You didn't care where the server was, right? And similarly, when the World Wide Web came, you just had to put the HTTP address and go to the web. Or when you send an email, you don't really care where the other person is.
Yeah.
So when we have developed systems where you can address someone or something without worrying about where or what is behind that, and something takes care of getting there, then you suddenly get network effects very rapidly because it's very easy. So the Aadhaar number has that network effect.
Okay,
Because
so
I can now identify you with the number. And for example, if I want to send money to you, I just say send money to Aadhaar number 123, and somewhere on the cloud that goes to credit your bank account.
Okay, so it's much more than it's much more than merely a form of ID.
It's also an addressable, an address. It's also like an IP address. It's an address for a person.
Yeah, and it also seems to be, and this is something that has always fascinated me, that it's a set of capabilities for authenticating people, right?
That's
and
right.
So whatever the application, whatever the context in which you need to verify that you are who you say you are,
Sure.
that it's providing that capability. It's not
Sure.
just providing it as a piece of paper, as a card.
It's an
or as a
online
smart-
capability.
it's an
That's what
online-
takes it beyond the 20th century ID systems. Yeah.
And so there are a couple of these applications that have recently come out, right? And I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit.
Yeah,
about
I think the
that.
big application which just got launched this month is using the ID for cash transfers.
Okay.
And remember, the original purpose of this program was to make government spending more efficient.
Yep.
So it is really the purpose of this in some sense. So what we have done is that with every ID of a person, we can associate a payment product, which is say a bank account, but tomorrow it can be something else. So you attach the ID to a bank account. And since the ID is a KYC, I can use it to open a bank account immediately. So I can walk in with this ID in theory tomorrow in a bank and open the bank account.
Okay.
So that's account opening. Second, it's used by the government system for what's called as deduplication. Let's say you have 100,000 people benefiting from some program.
Okay.
If you get the Aadhaar numbers of all of them, it automatically removes ghosts and duplicates. That's a huge benefit for the government. So because only real people are there in the database.
So you're not paying out to people.
You're not
who
paying
don't
out to
exist.
people who don't exist.
Okay.
And then using the property of that as an address, the government program just sends money to the address.
Okay.
So let's say you're in a beneficiary program, your number is 123. The government program just says send 500 rupees to number 123.
Okay.
And somewhere on the cloud, 123 maps to an account in State Bank of India or wherever.
Okay. And what's the scope of this right now?
We have about, we just started about 10 days back.
Okay.
So it's still early days, thousands of people are getting it. But it's a platform, and if you open a bank account and link it to the ID, and if you put the person's number in the, in the benefit database, after that, that's a one-time activity. After that, ongoing is just technology. It's just a switch. It's just a file going electronically, straight through processing, as you call it in New York.
Okay. And so the state governments can sort of like,
Yeah.
on their own pace.
Yeah.
sort of
So
start to
people can
switch things
use this
over.
platform, and different people at different times can onboard their beneficiaries and make these payments.
Okay. And there was also sort of not a private sector, but sort of a banking application that
Yeah.
has
So
started, right?
So
as well?
as I said, there are 5 uses of the ID in the cash transfers. First, to open the bank accounts, the KYC property. Second, to eliminate ghosts and duplicates, the uniqueness property.
Yeah.
The third, to remove fraud by making sure the genuine person gets the money, the addressable property. The fourth is its use as an online authentication device. So we have a device called the micro ATM, which can be deployed in a village, and it's nothing but a mobile phone with a printer and a fingerprint reader attached. So a person can go to a micro ATM which is deployed in a grocery store or in a, wherever, self-help group or wherever it is, authenticate themselves, and after the ID is verified, they can withdraw money from the bank account. So that's the authentication feature of that. And finally, because the Aadhaar number is there from beginning to end, you get end-to-end traceability of the money. So if the government sends money at this end to number 1, 2, 3, you know that it actually reached the person at the end. So it gives you complete auditability.
Okay, and I'm glad you're getting into the details of this. Because
I know, I'm getting to...
No, in some sense, the true power of, like, what this will be down the line is, like, isn't visible until you sort of understand all the different details and all the different capabilities. But, as you know, another thing about the way that you rolled out the UID, because as, like, my numbers may be off, but my sense is that you're at about, what, 250, 300
million enrolled.
300 million enrolled, and, sort of in a little over 2 years, this sort of probably makes it one of the fastest ever adopted technologies in history, right? There may be some Facebook application, or Zynga, there's a game. Farmville may be sort of like, ahead of the UID, but, you can't compete with Farmville.
Interesting.
So, but the way in which this has gone forward, to me, has so many different, in some sense, it also brings in stuff from, there's thinking from the tech sector. There's this sort of platform thinking and the franchising thinking.
Sure.
And so just sort of tell us a bit about the way that you actually went from design to 300 million people without setting up sort of a massive new
we have only about 200 people who work with us, our UID team. But our ecosystem has 50 to 100,000 people working. So basically, it's a leverage model. And this is very similar to what happened in the PC world, right? In the PC world, Microsoft developed an operating system, Intel developed the chip, HP and Dell and Lenovo made the computers, and there were lots of distributors that sold those computer land and all that. So basically, there's a whole ecosystem. So we built a similar ecosystem for enrollment where we run the backend technology and we drive the software design. And then we have partners like state governments and banks who are actually entering into agreement with us to enroll people. And they in turn hire enrolling agencies to do the enrollment. And the enrolling agencies in turn hire certified operators to do the enrollment, the actual job. And we pay $1 per person to our partners who in turn pay. So there's a whole incentive aligned revenue model for the enrollment agency. And this is a highly scalable architecture.
So the enrollment agencies are private companies.
Could be private, could be public. We have 75 of them. And they in turn hire these operators. And they invest in the hardware, which are based on specifications that we lay down. Exactly like how a PC is built, right? It's all put together. And then they enroll maybe 50 people a day or whatever in various locations based on what is told to them by the bank or the state government. So they're really subcontractors to these entities. So this gets a scalable architecture for enrollment. But the thing is, when you do this kind of massive distribution of work, you need to be able to manage quality, productivity, fraud, all those things.
Absolutely.
So this is a highly granular data-driven system. So we have near real-time data on what exactly is happening at every one of our nodes. Like, even though that node is 3 employees removed from us in some sense, we know exactly which enrollment station enrolled how many people, what was the quality, who was the operator, how did he perform, how much time he took on the biometrics. So by putting this high level of instrumentation into the supply chain, we're able to manage this supply chain as one integrated supply chain, even though the individual components are performed by different entities. And this is leveraging existing infrastructure in the country. So we're already using the banking system. State governments already have offices in every taluka. So by using existing physical infrastructure, you do an overlay of this in that and use technology and this data view of things to manage it. I don't know, am I sounding crazy or?
No. It's like the blueprints are developed centrally. So you've got, the processes, the training sort of program is developed centrally. And then the operators are
So all the IP is developed.
Yeah.
but the execution is distributed.
Yeah, and then you're sort of overlaid this sort of
Data
business
layer.
intelligence
Yeah.
system on top
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a new model of a public-private partnership, right? It's not the linear sort of, government partners with private sector, or government gives sort of real estate assets to private sector and then revenue shares.
Yeah.
And because I've always thought of a platform as sort of like, the digital era's model of a public-private partnership. If Google had to sort of sit and contract with each of the Android developers, come up with a joint venture or a strategic alliance, I mean, impossible, right? But they just sort of put it out there. And, I've been wondering how, because, a lot of the country's infrastructure sort of challenges moving forward, there are some that have this sort of digital content component to them. There are some that are more physical infrastructure. But in all of the cases, there's going to be, in a lot of the cases, especially the economic infrastructures, there is this last mile aspect to it, right? Where you need to sort of reach sort of house by house, person by person. There's also going to be a need for developing new processes, new capabilities, for example, for energy distribution or water distribution or waste management. And there's going to be a need for making sure that, let's say that we let the private sector build out some infrastructure, that they're doing the job right, and that they can sort of be helped in a way. And so it seems to me that your enrollment ecosystem has some elements that might, apply to not just, digital type infrastructures. And so have you sort of thought about this?
Yeah, no, obviously it's much more easy for digital infrastructure because that's what it does. And I think it'll vary from area to area, but even if you take our business correspondent network, which we're talking about, which is the banking side of it.
Yeah.
Because this electronic device can be anywhere in the country on the cloud, suddenly anyone can be a business correspondent in this network. So you get the same network effects. So let's say we have 1 million business correspondents. They are essentially like manned ATMs. And a customer who's on the banking system can go to any one of them to withdraw his money. That's again happening because the technology is the same in all million of them, and it's all interoperable. So the way to think about it is that if you want to integrate a lot of public and private providers, then enforce the business rules or the government rules through software. And make sure that is used as the gateway. And that automatically brings in accountability, transparency, reconciliation, fraud management, performance metrics, everything. So let's take healthcare, for example. Let's say that you want to use healthcare distribution through both public and private outlets. How do you know that they're actually delivering the quality you want? How do you know they're not gaming the system? And so on. So you can build a platform where, as long as that healthcare delivery is documented or sort of traced through this platform, then you can centrally manage and know exactly the quality and reliability of any service provider. So you can think of that as a scalable way of distribution of distributed delivery using a centralized information platform.
I mean, I guess a feature of this is that the government entity does not sort of build an empire, right? That you don't have sort of a large empire that's built.
So you're not. It's about getting the job done. So it's not about creating lots of secretaries and that kind of stuff. So obviously your mindset has to be towards solving the problem.
That's sort of a challenge in itself, right? And you're also sort of ceding control over procurement.
So the thing is that
the procurement is being done by the private sector
for example, in our model, we define the devices for enrollment stations. But the actual capital investment is done by the enrolling agency. And so we have essentially ceded control over purchasing anything. We say you do what you want. You can buy it as long as you meet our specs. And the revenue model for the enrolling agency only comes from successful enrollments. So the economic recovery of capital for the enrolling agency comes from enrolling. And therefore, it creates an incentive in the system to do enrollments. And you prevent, but it also lead to negative incentive of doing it too fast or bad quality, which you control through data.
Because I'm just thinking, I read this, or I think someone told me about this on Monday, and I had read about it in September, that there's this Delhi-Gurgaon highway, right? That sort of is like and sometime in September, there was, the High Court had ordered the toll collectors to stop collecting tolls. And it was because the performance of toll collection was sort of insufficiently efficient, and there were all these sort of, these traffic queues that were building up. But on the flip side, if you think about it from the point of view of the private sector entity who has invested in building the highway, this was a sign, or it was a signal that, if you're a private sector entity who goes in and builds infrastructure, a court can come in and sort of slice your revenue model.
Sure.
And it seems to me that if some of these ideas.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, what happens there is that there's mutual suspicion in some sense, because one is the court stops making revenue, but then the government feels that the guy operating is not declaring all the income at the toll gate. So it works both ways. So that again is a very, very viable solution for a platform where, you have the same technology for some RFID chip or something which is on every vehicle. Yeah. So as they drive by, they automatically deduct their account. They can upload, they can replenish the account like a prepaid account of a mobile phone. So you can create a network where you start with a few toll gates and toll stations, and you can keep adding more. So this is a place where you can use a network effect and digital infrastructure superimposed on a physical infrastructure of roads to improve efficiency. So these are there are many such. Healthcare is another. I mean, for example, health records.
Yeah.
It's very important to create nationally portable electronic health records, because then wherever you are, you should be able to. At the same time, you want privacy and security on your health records. So you can do that using the site.
Critical.
So lots of stuff like that you can build as layers on top of this.
Okay, and so it's sort of a model for public-private partnerships for a whole bunch of other kinds of infrastructure. I don't want to put you on the spot by asking you how viable you think it is, given that you sort of seed the empire building and you seed control over procurement. But in some sense, you said, you hit the nail on the head when you said it sort of has to involve people who want to get the job done, right?
Yeah, it's an outcome-oriented view of life.
And in the last panel, sort of Mr. Narayanamurthy was talking about leadership, where we need leaders who sort of walk the walk, and he talked about Gandhi. You guys remembering sort of like sort of being the change that you want to see, and so on. And so I think that a lot of the people who I've talked to in the UID authority, I think, came to work for the UID authority because you were affiliated with it, and there was some sort of sense of confidence that something would actually happen, and that things would move forward. And so, it's pretty inspiring in some sense to see that you sort of left the corporate sector and sort of took on this role in government. So I kind of have two questions on that front. One is, why did you do this? And the other is, having seen, sort of corporate India and been in a leadership role in corporate India and been in a leadership role in sort of the government of India, what are the different challenges that someone else who sort of is in a corporate leadership position and who wants to jump to government to sort of make a difference and get the job done, what are the things that they should look out for? What are the challenges that they might face?
I can't tell you everything, but...
Okay, well, to the extent that you can, so...
Because then I'll probably lose my job.
Well...
No, I think, first of all, I did it because I felt there was, it's time people did it, in the sense that, there are these large, humongous problems, and if some of the skills that we have in business can be applied and to solve them, that's a good thing. So it was really from a point of view of giving back and making a difference. So that was my motivation for doing it. And I think on the other one, I think it's a very different world, right? Business is about growing a company, growing revenues, earnings per share, cost control, profitability, innovation, new products, and all that. And it's in some sense the parameters of success are well defined. You grow revenues, you grow your share, market price, you grow your earnings, you expand. It's the measurement tools are straightforward in the sense it's all the same. And second, the pool of people, or the pool of, you're accountable to only certain people. You're accountable to your employees, to your management team, to your board, to your shareholders, and to the analysts and others. So it's really, it's a fairly well-defined world. So you operate in that world, right? This is a much more open world where you have a lot more complexity of stakeholders who come with different backgrounds, ideologies, agendas, and so forth. So you have the government itself. The government has the political system. It has the bureaucracy. It has the parliament. Then we have the judicial system, which has a view on things. You have activists who have a view on things. You have the media. So it's a much more complex pastiche of players, and therefore navigating through that and figuring out a roadmap where you can get to where you want to get is very important to get that right. Because if you don't get that right, then you can get stymied very fast. For example, just to give you an example, we said we'll only do an ID system. And we kept it minimalistic in its design. Because we said if we start saying we'll do this and we'll do that, then we're probably cutting into somebody else's area, and then you have a reaction. So you have to, it's like minimal invasive surgery. You sort of
precision.
Very precision is required. Otherwise, you can't. If you go with a bludgeon, then system will just, block up on you. So you need to be able to make a clear incision and then take it forward. So lots of things you need to do strategically and tactically to drive that. So you don't face those kind of challenges in a corporate setup.
Okay. But you think sort of it's a transition that is doable for...
No, you have to reset your, thinking on these things. For example, you are not going to get results by command. So you have, it's not in a company. At the end of the day, if you issue some instructions.
I've never had success on that front, sort of in any aspect. So
I guess like a university, I guess. So, so it's much about.
Universities have all the same stakeholders.
I'm saying, so you work by persuasion, you work by evangelization, you work by selling the value proposition individually to different stakeholders so they come on board. So it's a lot more work in consensus building and getting everybody on the same page.
Okay. All right. Well, I've got a whole list of other things that I want to talk to you about, but I think we're sort of close to midway through, so I wanted to make sure that we had plenty of time for audience discussion and questions. And I'll just assume that the questions are for Nandan unless you sort of explicitly say that they're for me. So I see Paul's hand up there, so why don't we start with Paul?
Have you already thought ahead about how this could extend to other countries? So if Indonesia comes to you and says, we'd like to participate as well, do you have to have just a single database here to watch for duplications, or is there a way to distribute between different countries but still retain the uniqueness?
Yeah, well...
Did you guys hear the question?
Well, technologically, this can grow, we believe. I mean, obviously, nobody's done it yet, so we'll find out soon. But if we can grow it to 1 billion people, you can probably grow it to larger. But, countries may not want to have this in some other place. There may be national sovereignty issues. But they can build the same platform. There's nothing India-specific about the platform. I mean, any country can choose to use this platform and create their own database.
Would there be a way to somehow have independent databases, but still for duplications between the two?
Yeah, you could, well, we haven't really, I'm sure we could figure out a way to create a federated architecture where you can create a global kind of thing. Like, it's a global ID system. Yeah, you could probably do it, yeah.
Okay, so let's start with this side.
First one is why this is not mandatory yet, because I think it's optional. So do you see gradually making it mandatory, or maybe through your customers like banking making this mandatory? And the second question is on the fraud. If I bring someone and say, oh, I know this person, but how do you verify he's not an illegal resident in the country?
Yeah, first of all, it is not mandatory because we think that it's better that people come to this because there's some value and benefit out of having it as opposed to because it's a government mandate. Our view is that over time, it'll be so useful to people for a variety of applications that they will take it because it just makes a lot of sense to take the number. And we want to create a virtuous cycle where the more enrollments we do, more applications get built. And the more applications get built, more people see use in it. So we want to create a virtuous cycle of enrollment and applications to drive the enrollment as opposed to doing it by, by an edict. So that's point number one. Second, this is not a citizenship system. This is only an ID system. This only says that X is X. The determination of whether X is a citizen or not a citizen continues to rest in the appropriate authority, in this case, the Home Ministry. So we're not getting into the, so think of citizenship as an application of identity. Yeah. And that's really administered by somebody else. Similarly, whether the person is eligible for getting some benefit meant for the poor is a decision taken by the department that gives benefits to the poor. So eligibility for a particular benefit or status is still the domain and prerogative of the appropriate agency. Always saying is X and verifying that online.
I mean, in some sense, I think about this contrast that we used to teach students about between de facto and de jure standards. In some sense, you've chosen the path where you don't want to mandate it, but over
rather
time,
let it become organic in sense. It should become popular because it is useful, not because you force it on people.
And in some sense, that will maximize its eventual
it's more sustainable that way.
Right? So, Sriram, you had a question?
So my question is how do you ensure consistency of the applications that are developed? So if you look at, say, the Apple App Store or Android's App Store, there is a certain level of consistency between the applications that are developed, even though Apple or Google don't actually develop most of the applications that are made there. So do you see your group doing a similar role where maybe if different states develop applications for the same purpose, ensuring a consistency for the user experience? Because if somebody goes from, say, Karnataka to Maharashtra, if there's a difference in the user experience, they're going to be upset. So how do we ensure consistency there?
Yeah, the thing is, it's not an app store in the Google Android sense, because there you actually have a place where you have apps and you enforce rules. Here, it's basically allows anyone to build apps as long as they adhere to the ID standards and interfaces that we have published, which is on our website. So we're not really getting into the UI. It's more an infrastructure play than a UI play. To me, the closer example is GPS, global positioning systems. Now, if you know the history of global positioning systems, they began at the height of the Cold War and Star Wars, and it was a set of geostationary satellites which was used to triangulate a person's position and establish their exact latitude and longitude. That's the GPS. And the original purpose of GPS was a military function, to get the exact address of a target to bomb it. Now, in the year 2000, the GPS was put in the commercial domain when Clinton was the president. And between 2000 and now, in 12 years, GPS has created a huge set of applications around it, right? So inertial navigating systems in planes, Google Maps or Apple Maps, Foursquare, so location-based services in general. So what GPS does is it answers the question, where am I? And then on top of this, where am I question, people have built apps. So it's more like a back-end infrastructure like GPS, which answers the question, who am I? As opposed to a front-end infrastructure, which has a UI aspect. So there'll be lots of apps which inside it will use this ID, but the outside-facing app will be very, very different.
Okay, there was a question here. Yes. I see lots of hands up, which is a good thing.
Hello, it's been great hearing about your vision and your execution. Coming from the technology world, I have two questions. The first is, as a CEO, you have led a lot of technology projects worldwide. What were the unique challenges to developing such a massive technology platform in India? And the second question is, with any ID-based system, there are possibilities of identity theft, especially in the online world. So what measures are being taken to ensure the privacy concerns of people are addressed? Thank you.
Sure. It's a fairly, obviously, fairly large project, but I think the way we look at it is that the design is actually very simple, but it's hugely scalable. It's, instead of having complex design, it's simple design that's highly scalable. So we really only do 2 or 3 things. We do enrollment, where somebody walks into an enrollment station, provides some information, very basic information. Using that information and deduplicating it, we generate a number for them. That's one sort of enrollment supply chain, if you will. And then we provide authentication, where you walk in somewhere and say you're X, we'll confirm back that you're X. That's the two things we do. The third thing we do is what's called electronic KYC. So when you go to open the bank account, you tell the bank, I'm this person, and you authorize the UID to release your data on your name and address to the person. And that becomes the way to open the bank account. So we do very simple things, but we do them at scale. So really the challenge is as much about, not so much about the app itself, but the scale of the app, which requires, for example, the entire backend technology is using internet architecture. It's using Hadoop and, RabbitMQ and all the internet. It's like how Google is built. So it's using the internet kind of highly scalable features. The biometrics is, again, untested territory. I mean, nobody's reached these levels before. Like already our database is 250 million people, and the next one is 120 million. So it's already double what is elsewhere. And it's multimodal, which means it uses fingerprints and iris and face. It's actually trimodal. So those kind of things are very much cutting edge kind of things. Now on the privacy thing, we are deliberately designed it to be, in some sense, an ignorant system. Because first of all, the information that we have on the person is very simple. Just the name, address, date of birth, sex, email ID, phone number if they wish to give it, and the biometrics. Biometrics used only for two purposes: for enrollment deduplication to make sure it's a unique number, and for authentication. And when an application uses the ID, all the UID system knows is that your ID was verified by the bank. What you did in the bank is known only to the bank. So it's a federated architecture where it's not like one massive database which has hundreds of fields about you. So the banking system knows what you did with the bank. The healthcare system knows what you did with the healthcare system, which is the way today also. Except that for ID verification, they use our APIs. So it's designed in a way that no one entity has all the details. So there are lots of things from a design perspective to minimize the privacy thing.
Okay, but that's an important point, right? Because it means that there aren't these sort of single-keyed databases of people's activities across different sectors. That
One in theory could say that somebody could concatenate it, but that's far more difficult because it will require multiple organizations to now start colluding, which is a bigger problem. It's about data sharing and all that. So it's designed to actually segregate and federate data, so no one person has all the data.
Okay, I think about whenever this issue of privacy comes up, sort of related to the UID, and I think about the stark difference between the amount that is known about the typical US resident relative to the amount that is known about the typical Indian resident, and it's probably 2 or 3 orders of magnitude more data that is known across these different spheres. And I guess that's sort of a byproduct of progress, right? So it's, privacy is a very important issue, but I think that it's always seemed to me to be a bit of a red herring, sort of in the context of the UID, because there will be an identifier that industry will generate to start to sort of tie together our different activities across different domains. That's come from the private sector in the United States. It'll probably come from somewhere in India. Maybe it'll be your mobile number, maybe it'll be the IP address of your mobile device. And so if it ends up being your UID, that doesn't necessarily mean that the UID was responsible in any way for the creation of these databases. It just happened to be
your Facebook Connect gives more about you than your UID does.
It's worrying. I look at all the things that it seems to know, but I go to TripAdvisor these days, and it says the friend of your friend sort of liked this hotel. And I didn't even know that I was logged on. And I teach about this stuff, right? So I can't imagine how much more invasive it must be for other people. But you had a question. I saw your hand up, yeah. And, yes.
We talked about the UID platform being available to the private sector as well. Are you already seeing particular interest or any sort of applications that are being talked about or coming up?
Yeah. We have last month, app was launched by a consortium of 5 banks and Visa, which gave an instant prepaid account if you walk into a Kirana store, which has a outlet. It's called Saral Money. And they've launched it in Delhi with about 50 to 100 shops. That's entirely private innovation.
Okay, I mean, are there any other sort of application fronts that you see?
Yeah, I mean,
progress?
it's early days yet because we think that, if you look at the history of the internet or even of GPS, it takes a few years before this new artifact sinks in and people then build apps. So I think we are trying to force the pace by driving it through cash transfers and other government apps and sort of creating enough of a critical mass of usage.
Yeah.
And then we think there'll be the wave of sort of private apps will be later as people figure out what's going on here.
Yeah, so you're sort of building the platform from the core rather
Yeah.
than waiting for it to emerge from the fringes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, we forget about the time scales associated with these
Yeah.
things, right? It's been a mere 2 years since launch. And yeah, if you look at it was a decade before from the time that GPS became
No,
a
GPS
viable
came
thing.
out in 2000 and Google Maps in 2006. So it took
Yeah,
about 6 years.
6 years.
We take Google Maps as an example.
Yeah, and the internet as well. I mean, there
Yeah.
was a couple of decades
mean,
of time before
89,
the commercial.
89, whatever. I mean, early 80s was TCP/IP, early 90s was World Wide Web, 95 was
Yeah.
Mosaic and Netscape, and
Sort of-
Facebook is 2007.
Yeah,
So, I mean, it
mainstream
takes time to
e-commerce.
get these things out.
Okay. Let's see, there was a hand up there. Yeah, the gentleman. I'm trying to keep track of this sequence, and I'm a professor after all, right? And so, yes.
In the context of actually building infrastructure, one of the things I realized is you had a vision that you wanted to identify 1.1 billion Indians. And when you approach such a problem, the implementation is really hard because I don't think any company, even a multinational today, can actually go to so many villages, so many different townships and actually touch so many people. So what has been so critical to your success that you've been able to grow from 0 to 300 million people, like you said, in terms of doing it in a cost-effective way, in terms of regulatory pressures, and what are the challenges also, I guess?
Well, I think a very important decision that we took was not to create our own dedicated infrastructure to do this, but to leverage existing institutions and assets on the ground. So when, for example, we have state governments as partners, state governments have huge machinery on the ground. They have districts and district collectors and magistrates, and they have outlets and panchayat offices. When we have banks as our partners, we get access to the banking branches. So the key thing is, how do we use existing infrastructure institutions as opposed to creating our own? So that's a very important, leveraged model in some sense. So, but to do that, you can only do that by standardizing the technology platform, because it's important that whether a person walks into a bank branch in Nariman Point or a panchayat office in Bihar, the enrollment must be identical. The fact that they're physically two different places so that's why creating a technology platform which has standardized interfaces and software enables you to create physical location diversity, but use technology to drive the commonality. So that was the key, using existing infrastructure and creating a partnership model and creating an incentive model where payment was entirely on outcomes. So when we pay our partners, we pay only on successful IDs generated. So everybody in the value chain has to make sure it works properly to get the money.
Yes.
Hello. Good afternoon, sir. We keep on hearing a lot of appreciation about your project in the leading dailies, and just now we heard that how can this be replicated in other countries like Indonesia. I have a very simple argument. I am not from the technical, I'm basically a mechanical engineer, not from the IT infrastructure background. We already had this concept of PAN card. So, and you yourself are mentioning that, okay, we are utilizing to the best whatever state machinery is already there. When we were in school, we used to be having this passport as our point of identity. When we started earning, we were asked to get this PAN card done. Now we are seeing UID AI. Now maybe after 5 years, some new concept comes in. Do you actually justify all these expenditures which are being borne? Maybe it can be because of you can say clash of the visions or of the different governments or whatever, but was it an option for you to consider PAN card to be scalable up to this kind of project?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, obviously, we looked at all the, just to give you a sense of scale, India's population is 1.2 billion people. Number of passport holders is 50 million, 5%. Number of PAN card holders is 80 million, 8%. Number of taxpayers is 30 million, 3%. Okay, so you don't really have anything which has, you've got to reach 1 point, there's nothing that reaches so many people. So second is that these are all physical products. You get a card, you get a passport, but ultimately you need a digital ID which can then be used in any physical product. So in fact, the passport people just last week said that Aadhaar is sufficient KYC for a passport. So it becomes an aid to give a passport. A passport is an application of identity that allows you to travel abroad. Yeah. A PAN card is an application of identity which allows you to pay taxes. But underlying that, you need to have a root identity which can be used.
Absolutely.
So that's exactly what we do.
Absolutely. That's what my argument was. The passport, as you mentioned, is from the MOHA, from the Ministry of Home Affairs. You get the approval, you are a citizen.
External affairs.
Yeah.
Not external affairs.
External affairs, sorry. And for this PAN card, it's from the income tax perspective. Okay, you are doing due diligence and you are submitting your dues to the government. So could this PAN card numbers, which are already there, could they have been digitalized? Because initially when you started, the number must have been 0. You're mentioning the numbers 3% and 15% and the 50 million, whatever it is. So initially you started from scratch.
Yeah,
so
I think the answer is already in that, right? I mean that these are particular specific application specific forms of physical identity.
See, they're not digital. There's no uniqueness. Yeah. There's duplicates. For example, somebody has multiple cards of a type, so you need to deduplicate. But most important is inclusion.
Yeah, sure.
There is, how do you address? Suppose there are 200 million people who don't have any ID. How do you give them the first ID? Because today it's a circular thing. To get your PAN card, you need a ration card. To get a ration card, you need a birth certificate. To get a birth certificate, you need to have been registered at birth. So if you're not in that loop, you're outside.
Yes.
So how do you get into the loop, right? So you need an ID to get into the loop.
Yes.
And in some sense, it highlights.
So think of it as, since you're based in New York, think of it as a 21st century Ellis Island. What happened at Ellis Island, right? Let's go back to the 19th century. You had a lot of migrants. You had migrants who came from Italy and from Ireland and Poland and whatnot. And they would land, in all those ships and land at Statue of Liberty, and then the person would ask their name, and they would have a long, complicated name from, Croatia or something. And that guy said, no, in America you will be Sam David.
Yeah.
Right? That's how it happened. I have so many friends whose original name is very different from the name they have in the US. And the same thing happened in Canada. People landed in Nova Scotia and became Canadians. So what they did was they were migrants, physical migrants from the old world to the new world. And though they had a past or they had a name, the name with which they got registered at Ellis Island became their name in the new world, right? So think of it similarly, that here you have all these people who have names in their private space, but are anonymous to the formal space. So they are entering virtually into this Ellis Island situation, and the name with which they register into this system becomes their formal name for the rest of their lives. But they're also migrants. They're migrating from the anonymity to the formal world.
And that's an interesting sort of image, right? So sort of like the virtual Ellis Island of India. Did you have your hand up again, Paul?
Can I go, please? Yeah.
Sure.
I had a question about savings in government expenditure, which clearly you mentioned is a very relevant application, apart from this UID being essentially a gateway for services. In terms of percentage leakage in the system, is that something you're able to share with us in terms of what scale we are talking about?
No, I think there have been lots of studies on leakage in delivery of NREGA systems or PDS varying from 10 to 40%, and there's enough public data on this. But specifically, the NIPFP has done a study on the cost benefit of the Aadhaar system, and they have shown that just using it in the NREGA system and in the PDS system itself pays for the investment. But the investment on the scale of the game is not that much. I mean, it costs us about $2 to $3 per person to enroll. So let's say we have 1.2 billion people. At $3, it comes to 3.6 billion US dollars, which is about, less than 20,000 crore rupees. Now, India's annual bill on subsidies and entitlements is about 300,000 crores, which is about 60 to 70 billion dollars. So for a one-time expense of about less than 4 billion, getting recurring benefits on $60 billion of spend. So the ROI is very straightforward.
Okay.
And this is just the ROI from the government benefit. Then there's whole other platform benefit that has other, I'm not even counting the payoff from the platform benefits.
Okay, there's a question here and then a question back there. So,
politics in India can be volatile, and I wondered if you worried that the political attitude towards the project had swung from skepticism towards a kind of unrealistic view of what the timetable is. For example, you hear in some circles that Congress, the ruling coalition government, hopes that cash transfers might be a policy that helps it win the next election in 2014. And I wonder whether you're concerned that you might see this sort of great rush to get some of the cash transfer projects off the ground, arguably prematurely.
Well, I think, cash transfers is one of the applications of the platform, right? It's an ID platform, and we obviously welcome the fact that there's a huge amount of interest in getting it done. I believe that what we are really doing is fixing plumbing. We're just building a plumbing platform which allows benefits to reach individuals in a much more direct and much more error-free manner. So I think it really has support from across the spectrum. And our view is that if we can enroll 500 million people, and if you're able to actually have millions of people getting the money directly, then it's really going to, everybody's going to embrace it. Sorry, I'm speaking in riddles, but.
Yeah, well, to ask the question more rudely, is it realistic that within 2 or 3 years, a big proportion of your base of people on the database would actually be receiving cash subsidies?
I don't know what is your definition of big proportion, but I can say that a significant number of people are going to realize the benefits, yes.
and in some sense, it's fortuitous if there is sort of external pressure to accelerate this, right? Whatever the reason, because that then grows
Absolutely.
the
I think
platform.
in a public system, you need the alignment. There has to be a problem to be solved, there has to be a solution, and there has to be political energy behind it. So all three are required to get success in the public area.
Okay, yes.
Hi. How do you deal with issues like, your enrollment agents actually underinvesting in infrastructure? Like we go to booths where you can register for UID in Mumbai or adjoining districts like Thane, Raigad, and so on. The crowds are huge. The waiting time is really long. There are no specific counters for senior citizens or pregnant women. So, I'm sure that, you have outsourced it, so it's not directly under your purview. But then it's clear that the enrollment agents have not invested for, that X amount of population in that district.
No, I think it's not the enrolling agency. See, the thing is, load balancing, and this is a very complex activity, right? We can't predict what will be the numbers. Now, an enrolling agency, first of all, has to be contracted by the registrar to do this function. Second, they will invest if they feel there's a transaction volume of 50 plus enrollments per day. So it's impossible to get this right. We do a lot of things. We use data. We have people who go and inspect enrollment stations. We're doing a lot of things to manage the ecosystem. But there are going to be unevenness in service quality. And I don't see any quick fix to this, because the only thing is, we will now create a network of permanent enrollment centers. So that way, people who missed out on one pass can come. The good thing about this is that even if enrollments happen in multiple waves, that's fine.
Okay, how about giving appointments for people online like you have in the passport office these days?
No, we do have online appointments. In many of our urban centers, you can book a slot and go and enroll.
Thank you.
Okay, there was a hand all the way in the back. You know, I always used to sit in the back row when I was a student, so I like to sort of favor the people who are there. You know.
Hi.
Sympathy for them.
So my question is again similar to the previous person's about maintaining quality and preventing misuse at the enrollment centers. So I had a personal experience where I went to one of the banks to get my Aadhaar number. And what I found was the bank was collecting a lot of additional data, far more than what was required for the Aadhaar number, such as income details and professional details for their own use. And are there any mechanisms in place to prevent such misuse of the enrollment centers?
No, see, our registrars can collect more information for their purpose. And I think the idea we're trying to do is make sure that it's a choice-based model where, you know, if you can go to the post office which does not collect any information. So it's difficult for us to enforce that a registrar does not collect any other information. Because part of the reason, in some sense, they're doing this is because they're building their identity system. So we don't encourage it, but I think we have to accept that. And are they making it mandatory? Are they insisting that you can't enroll without that data? Okay, but because we are very clear that these fields are mandatory and everything else is optional. So if they're miscommunicating that, then yes, of course, we should look at that.
Yes.
Yes. Have you tried to quantify the benefit of this to the economy? I mean, it seems significant enough to impact GDP growth.
No, I think what has been done is the NIPFP has done a cost-benefit analysis showing that the investment of say $4 billion or whatever it is, 16,000 crores, 16 to 20,000 crores is value for money. So that has been done. Now, the macroeconomic consequences of this in the long term, I don't think anybody's done it, and it's a lot of assumptions, right? I mean, obviously our goal is that when everybody, or most people have an Aadhaar number, and that Aadhaar number is used in a multitude of transactions, then in each of those transactions, we are reducing transaction cost because of the efficiency we bring in. So billions of transactions will reduce transaction cost. So obviously that's going to have macroeconomic implications. Or if more and more people have bank accounts that they can operate anywhere on the cloud, then the amount of money in the formal banking system will go up, and that will increase savings. I mean, you can make some assumptions, but I think it's a bit early to really project all those things.
I mean, it certainly is early days, and one of the things that we are doing, when I say we, I mean there's a collaborator of mine, Ravi Bapna, there's Rima Gupta, who's from the Indian School of Business, who's also a collaborator. We've started tracking like a sample of households that represents the country. This is a survey organization is collecting this information year over year. That's where the statistics that I alluded to earlier, that more than 70% of households have not even one member without a form of ID, comes from. But as that sort of progresses, if I look forward to 2014 or 2015, 5 years after we started, there will be sufficiently granular data in this sample to be able to say that here's when the person adopted the UID, here's when the person sort of used the UID to get a bank account, and to actually sort of tease out what would have happened had there not been the UID after controlling for everything else. And that's the point. I mean, that's the time, the time frame when, that's the point where, we will sort of independently be able to quantify the GDP impact. But I think that's a question that's best asked 2 years from now. The earliest that one would want to sort of ask that question is 2 years from now, which is a mere 4 years after launch, but still, it's going to take that much time, perhaps for these benefits to Sure, because to me, Nandan, actually, it's more than just the transactional stuff, because it's the gateway and the inclusion stuff. Because once you give someone an ID and you enable them to open a bank account, I mean, that opens their economic sort of capabilities. I mean, this inclusion by itself will have potentially a household welfare impact that goes well beyond sort of the cost savings. It goes into sort of expanding economic opportunity, and I think that's where you're going to see a lot of the bank sort of moving forward. Here and then there and
Nishad Khan. I personally see two direct benefits, and correct me if I'm wrong. Professor Roma in the morning during his session mentioned, the need for newer cities within India, hundreds of them actually, because he was projecting the population growth. I personally think that this particular initiative that Mr. Nilekani is handling is probably going to be a great enabler as far as planning the demographics for these new cities is concerned, really, going forward. So I think it's really, in one sense, it's pretty visionary in, in its approach. And the second benefit that I see is pretty direct is regarding the cash transfers. In India, we do, sort of subsidize heavily, but in many cases, the benefits do not reach the end users. A great deal of loss in transmission, whether it's our public distribution system or subsidies which are meant to reach. In this instance, I think, once you have these transfers being made directly, you would find that the end users actually getting what has been actually meant, to be given to them. So I think this is what I get out from whatever I've been hearing up to now. Thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, if there are any, I mean, I don't know if any questions have flown in.
Paul, you want to add anything since
have flowed in from Twitter?
You've been listening.
Okay. All right.
It's mostly a joke, but it's slightly serious. If I get a number, could this make it easier for me to get a visa next time I want to come to India again?
It's not a joke, Paul, because I've actually had discussions with a couple of embassies who want to provide a fast-track visa for people who have this number.
So could I go get a number if I went to an enrollment center?
Well, technically you're not a resident, so.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Hello. Yeah, hi. My question is related to identity theft and a little more technical on that side. So you mentioned about applications, the app which can access this platform. So you have the centralized database. So will you allow, so can I build an app which will, in which I can just key in the UID number and I get the information of the person. So, and then you said, people can develop a lot of apps which can interact with the data. So will you allow specific people, specific organization to develop the app? What's your plan on managing that ecosystem?
No, this is not a database that you can read. You can't come and say, give me this guy's address. This is a database that you use when you go somewhere to verify your identity to the counterparty. So it's only an identity verification database. So let's say your name is X and your number is 123. You go to the bank to withdraw money. You tell the bank I'm X number 123 and you give your fingerprint or iris image and we'll confirm back that you're X, that's all. So nobody can read this data. It's only a yes or a no answer which comes from that. So nobody else can, I mean, it's not that you can go and read. It's non-readable. It's a black box in that sense. Only an ID verification. The only time that your name and address get released is on your authorization. When you want to open a bank account, you're doing a KYC, you can authorize the UID system to release your data to the bank. So you can't go and ask for somebody else's data. No, you can do biometric verification with fingerprint, you can do biometric verification with iris, you can do demographic verification, you can do an OTP on your cell phone, you can do through an OTP through an email ID. So there are multiple forms of verification. And you can set up the system that every time a verification happens, you get a text message or an email. Like when you operate a credit card, you get that. The same thing applies here. So you can set it up. So suddenly if you get an SMS saying that somebody verified you somewhere else, then you know that somebody may be trying to use your ID.
Okay, I don't think that maybe we'll take one more question. whoever raises their hand most sort of aggressively. Okay, there you go.
He's standing, not in raising
Yeah,
his
he
hand.
hasn't yet.
Quite eager. I just wanted to dig in a little bit further on the concept of inclusion. You said you wanted to include 1.2 billion Indians.
Indian residents.
Indian residents. Okay, so just on that topic, I myself I'm a non-resident Indian. There's a lot of PIO, person of Indian origin card holders that I also know, and I'm sure there's a very big community of foreign people, foreign citizens living in India. So can you just share with us a little bit about how those three communities would be incorporated into the system, whether I as an NRI would be eligible for a UID? Because although an NRI, I do spend close to 2-3 weeks in India every year. So
2-3
I
weeks?
do.
Well, as of now, it's for residents. So,
Hmm.
for example, if you're working in an embassy for a few months and you're a resident, then you can enroll. As of now, it's not designed for non-resident Indians, but the law provides the government to declare new classes of people who are eligible. So that's technically the government can choose to extend it, but as of now, it's only for residents.
Okay, thank you.
But residents from everywhere,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, you just have
Anyone
to be
with a
living here.
resident, yeah.
And that's sort of a key distinction, that citizenship versus residency. All right, one final question from there. And then my dean is sort of doing this, so, you know.
What are some of the roadblocks you see in the next 3 to 5 years that could inhibit the UID program from realizing its potential? You know, kind of what keeps you up at night?
No, I think a significant part of it is execution risk, right? Because actually making it work on the ground is non-trivial. So, you know, the enrollment system, we have huge challenges in, you know, nobody's done this kind of letter delivery in the country. Every man, woman, and child is going to get a letter from us with a number. So it's actually creating the first name address database in some sense. So that is being very challenging. I think scaling up cash transfers is going to be a big thing in the next coming months. And you know, this is very complex technology. It can always have challenges. So I think there are lots of worries of that type. I think the strategic risks have come down in the sense that the idea is accepted, there's enough buy-in, and you know, and you know, all the budgets are in place and all that. So those kind of risks are down, but mostly I would say execution risks. And also because in some sense this has the potential to disintermediate a lot of things. There could be potential pushback from people who get affected by disintermediation.
I mean, in a sense, that's similar to, like, you go into an organization with a new ERP system.
Yeah, yeah.
You're going to sort of, there are going to be stakeholders who get
Yeah,
displaced, and you
it's
have
like
to
any
sort
other
of,
massive change management.
you have to co-opt them. So, okay, I'm going to save the final question for myself, and then we'll close. I'm not going to look this way. I'm going to sort of look at you. That's where Dean Geeta Menon is sitting and telling me that we're running out of time.
She's saying
which
this.
is, yeah, which I'm. I mean, we have a little bit of command and control in universities, so you know, it's sort of, you know, but
I think she wants.
But it's yeah, it's.
She wants people to get to the cocktails.
Yeah, it's line of sight based command and control. So if I sort of, you know, so the, I guess, you know, there's a lot that we've learned from your sort of execution of planning and execution of this. And I think, like, you know, we can take away a number of ideas for how we can, like, you know, take the success of this and apply it to, like, you know, other infrastructure rollouts. And, you know, we've alluded to healthcare and banking and, you know, education, and even something like, you know, sort of like, you know, building highways. There are certain elements of it that can be layered onto, you know, new forms of public-private partnerships. So, I mean, if you look back at the last 3.5, 4 years, if, you know, is there anything that you'd have done differently if you had to do it again?
I think strategically, I think it was fine. I think execution-wise, we made a few errors, and you know, I would, you know, basically we built a model which disaggregated the value chain, right, and got different people to do different pieces of the value chain.
Okay.
And integrated it with data. So that, I think we've learned a lot about how to manage disparate entities and how better to sort of manage their performance. There, I think we could have done better.
Okay, I mean, I'm going to be contacting you about sending. We've got a number of MBA teams who every semester are
Sure.
extremely interested in. This is the most popular topic, and we have this thing called Stern Consulting Core,
Sure.
where they sort of do social
Great.
impact
They're
sort
most
of
welcome.
analyses. So there's a team that's going to come in at some point and try and understand how to translate the new models that have been developed through the UID to other infrastructure
Great.
things. So look out for them. So
Super.
so thank you so much for taking
Thanks,
the time.
Arun.
Nandan.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.